for this NDI webinar. Today we will be talking about how NDI is being used within the educational space, with a particular focus on how PTZOptics gives control over video to high school educators and students. Today I'm joined by Stephen Heywood, CEO of the Tech Buzz, who works with PTZOptics on projects like the setting up of the Hubbard High School project. Alongside Stephen, we have Matthew Davis, Director of Product and Technology with PTZOptics. And from NDI, we have our very own Roberto Musso, who is Technical Projects Marketing Director. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. These guys are here to answer your questions. So please, during the webinar, type any questions you might have into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can during the Q&A section, which is coming up. But first, I caught up with Stephen and Matthew earlier in the week to talk about how NDI it was helping the installation of the Hubbard High School, plus what kind of NDI-enabled products they were being used in the installation. So let's have a look at the interview. I'm joined today by Stephen Heywood, CEO of the Tech Buzz, and Matt Davis, Director of Product and Technology with PTZOptics. Hello, guys. How are you?
Doing pretty well. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thank you very much for joining us today. Just to kick us off, Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about the Tech Buzz, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had been doing this for almost 20 years. I got started like a lot of people in tech, and I migrated to broadcasting, internet streaming, and even gaming. I do dabble in that. So locally I do a lot of consulting with local houses of worship, schools, and just people trying to do their own brands on live streaming and video production.
All right, I guess you were using NDI in most of those productions then?
I push NDI as much as possible. Even in my own studio, I'm 100% NDI.
That's great to hear. And Matthew, most viewers will be familiar with PTZOptics, but for those who aren't familiar, can you just give us some background and tell us what you're known for?
Yeah, we're known for creating some relatively easy to use, high quality, affordable cameras. Our main goal has really been trying to get as many people involved in content creation as possible. We just think it's a beautiful thing.
And we're going to be talking about PTZOptics here. Have you got any news to share with us about what's latest releases?
Yeah, we've got a lot of exciting things that we've launched recently. So we've got our Move 4K line that recently came out, which is a series of 4K 60 capable cameras. They also feature the latest NDI HX3. So if you want some really high quality out of the cameras, they can provide that for you. The other nifty feature that you'll find on there outside of HX3, auto tracking. So you can switch between different people on a stage. They can go and hide behind a object on the stage and pop back out. But these things combined with NDI just provide an amazing product for our end users.
Great. And we're here to be talking about education mainly today. Is that a big growth area for you at PTZOptics?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the main one. We're seeing most of our industries grow at this point with regards to interest in capturing content, whether that's to go live or even for internal uses. We're just seeing more and more interest in more and more companies and verticals and not losing this information that's so valuable to them.
Okay. And Matthew, what kind of products are popular with educational facilities that you're seeing from PTZOptics side?
Yeah, we're seeing pretty much our full array of products. Our 30X cameras going into auditoriums, smaller school room areas are using 12X cameras. And really one of the main things we've seen kind of help push this forward, and probably going to be a little narrative as we talk throughout all this, the ease and simplicity of deploying NDI versus everything else they've ever had to touch whenever they've tried to do a broadcast, this or that. It has made it so appealing to these end users to just keep adding to their systems after their first experience.
And in your experience, Stephen, what kind of products from PTZ are you using when you do these kind of installations?
A lot of them that we're using are 12x and 20x cameras, or in the classroom, or any kind of plays and things like that that we're doing. 30X, a lot of times, are being used for sports. So having those implemented over NDI where they can take those cameras from classroom to classroom and plug them into an existing PoE switch is just easy.
Can you tell us a little bit about the case study and the kind of setup that you had there? So you had a mobile facility. What kind of things are you using there? Using vMix, a few other different things. Can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. I could actually. I'll pull this up here. So they have a broadcasting club here that they were back and forth between Wirecast and vMix, and they've settled on vMix. They have as you can see here, they have a green screen set up with some lighting. The PTZOptics cameras over NDI, just straight into the network, and basically instructing the kids on how to use the cameras and how to do basic switching and techniques inside of that. We've also done things outside of that. We've done plays, we've done graduation, a whole host of other means that we've done.
Yeah, it was a kind of question for you both. How are you seeing NDI being used in the educational environment?
A variety of ways, sometimes surprising, where Stephen already hit on a bunch of the topics, but like one of the ones that I found a little bit more surprising is where they were using it for like interviews for new teachers and things like that. Where again, it was like, hey, they normally would have people come in, you'd have one person sit there and interview them, but they've now discovered, hey, we have a whole bunch of people that work here. If we record these interviews, well, we can have all 5 people that have a say in this actually see how this person, is behaving and if they really want this job. But yeah, I mean, sports seems to be, I'd say, the biggest thing I see growing in the educational field at the moment, especially if we're looking at like middle and upper education.
Okay, and you, Stephen, what kind of setups are our educational facilities usually looking for?
Basically, very simplified, easy to use setups. They don't want massive learning curves and things like that. And that was kind of what I was trying to do with building the mobile rig that I had built, to be able to go in there with NDI. I think the biggest challenge that you deal with in schools or any place is network, right? So you get into a place, you don't know what kind of internet you're dealing with. You don't know what kind of networking system you're dealing with. So being able to go into a place and be all self-contained, where you're bringing your own switch, you're bringing your own cameras and mobile rig just to plug in and get going. Like I could show you here, this setup that we did for a play, like I literally, everything was self-contained. I was able to build this at home, bring it in, be set up in 20 minutes and have it set up so that we could just start going. And all because of NDI making it possible, because all the other times you have to sit there and you got to go, okay, well, how am I going to get the internet? How am I going to get this? And how am I going to get that? Where am I routing this to? And where that it takes the guesswork out of it. We just throw everything. It's all in this self-contained rack, run an Ethernet cord, 300 feet, 200 feet, wherever we need it with the cameras. That's it. No power. It's all over PoE. And honestly, the longest that we ever had to deal with was just wrapping these cables up. It really is. It's that we've made it that simplified to be able to do this and have that ability to bring this in. And that's what the schools want. They want cameras. They want things that are set up that they can just plug it in and forget about it. And I think that's what I've accomplished with this. And then the results that you end up getting is just awesome.
Yeah, I was wondering what the reaction was from faculty and students that you've had so far.
So when we did this play and we were filming it, the response, and I think, Matt, you even said the same thing, it almost looked like a Nickelodeon film because of the way it was shot. And we were able to do it. It looks like a teenage Nickelodeon film, and this is actually a play. And we wanted to give the illusion that it wasn't a play, where you're just seeing the stage. And because of, the power of the cameras and NDI, you have that ability to just get these cameras in places just because you're running one cable and you can plug it into your network. It's that simple. And you could see the proof's in the pudding here. I mean, it looks like a little teenage sitcom, you know? So I think that tells the biggest story.
We are talking specifically about the Hubbard High School. What kind of productions are they involved with? Obviously, they did this play, but what other kind of things are they doing with video?
So they're doing their morning announcements that you've seen in that video earlier. The kids like to do little skits and things like that. It was big during the pandemic. That's why you're seeing a lot of the masks and stuff on the kids. But it's a way that they could show their personalities. So they're doing different skits like this. They're taking cell phones out, using NDI to transmit it back to that studio, interviewing faculty throughout the building. We've been doing basketball games where we're taking these cameras out of the studio, putting them up in the auditorium for that, as well as wrestling events. And they're starting to dabble. I think next year is going to be some baseball and even bowling. Believe it or not, they're going to be using our Move 4K for doing bowling, football games, anything that they could possibly bring these cameras to. And because NDI has just made it that easy that they just plug it into their network and go.
I guess NDI opens up a whole new world of possibilities for them. Matthew, what kind of is this kind of setup consistent with what your customers are actually asking you for?
Yeah, this falls right in line. I mean, the biggest thing that we see is people who want ease. They want something simple, and I think that's kind of been the beauty from our perspective at PTZOptics when we were, kindly invited to participate in this wonderful world of NDI. I had spent a long time in a security industry prior and worked with IP cameras and knew what an absolute nightmare the whole concept was. And meanwhile, here was somebody presenting an option that actually simplified this whole process and yet worked over a network. This thing that's at homes, it's at every office. And I think the core functionality of NDI just being this high quality, low latency, easy to use thing, it gives us product, manufacturers the ability to go wild with bells and whistles on top of it and start to really, really give people these things that seem almost magical because NDI is taking care of that core function that it was just so difficult to overcome before.
Guys, a question for both of you. What is the future of this kind of hybrid learning, do you think? And where do you think the biggest areas of development would be? I'm kind of thinking about, obviously, you mentioned before, Matthew, your AI auto camera tracking. Then there's things like audio management, automatic audio management in classrooms, automatic recordings and file sharings. Where do you guys think the future will be?
More automation, without a doubt. And as we're starting to move into this world where there's a lot of options to train AI, much easier than it used to be, I think we're going to see a lot more automation that doesn't necessarily say, here's one like auto tracking. Everybody's doing auto tracking. It's on all these things. It all kind of does the same concept. I think what we're going to see is a lot more niche versions of this starting to emerge where it's like, yeah, maybe only 100 people in the entire world need this automatic feature, but guess what? It can actually be done now for those 100 people without a problem.
And Stephen?
Yeah, I think we're going to see, I would like to see it from the standpoint as a producer and working with, faculty and students, more automation, exactly. But I also think you're going to see more VR introduced with it, where you're immersed in it. Like the camera manufacturers are going to be, designing cameras that work in the VR element to give them as much of that in-person experience in a hybrid learning environment. I think that's the direction I think everybody is aiming towards. I think that's the direction people are going to be going to really get that immersive feeling.
What about things like freeform, virtual sets being used with PTZ cameras? That's something that I would like to see. How about you guys? Would you think there would be a use for that? Yeah,
definitely. I think that we're at an intriguing moment with regards to virtual sets and cameras interacting because there has been this old technology around to accomplish it for a while. But that being said, it doesn't have all the feature sets that modern day, systems really want. I think we're at a unique point where we're going to start seeing a lot more encompassing options arrive and with much easier interfaces. As right now, you kind of need to be a little bit of an expert to get a lot of these things set up. And I think we're going to see, much like NDI brought to the table for getting cameras set up, similar concepts for getting your AR and VR set up.
That's great. I was going to ask you as a final question, how can NDI help you yourselves reach the goals for the things that you want to see?
I mean, at the moment, I can say I'm kind of happy with everything NDI has done because, like I said, you've given us this core that we can rely on. A lot of the times people keep changing their technology and the core of it changes at the same time, which proves to be problematic for anybody who's really trying to understand it well enough to make magic happen for those end users. And the beauty here is the core concept and how it operates and what it provides is the same today as the first time I touched it. Not saying it hasn't gotten better, but the concept is the same. And it just allows me to keep growing and growing off of it, which is just so incredible.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, and as a producer, I sat and I thought about years ago going to 4K. And I'm like, I don't even want to think about it. This was before NDI. And then NDI comes along and you guys make 4K easy because you don't have to run 4 SDI cables to each camera, to do this. It's all over Ethernet, all over HX. That was a game changer in my opinion as a producer and working in this environment. I wasn't nervous anymore. Now it's just like, oh, I just have to update some computer monitors to be able to view 4K. Before it was like, man, I got to run, 20, 30 cables in here. And instead it's just using the existing Ethernet. So that's game changer.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much for your feedback. And also we'll look forward to talking to you a little bit later on in the question and answer. So thank you very much, gents. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. And we are back for the question and answer section of the webinar. If you haven't already, this is your chance to ask any of your NDI questions to our expert panel. So please type them into the chat and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. I've got a couple of questions here to get us going. Matthew, with NAB coming up, what products are you guys most excited about showing off at the event?
Yeah, so there's really a line of products and then a new product. We're going to really be showcasing our new Move 4K line. So our new line of cameras, they are all pre-enabled with NDI. There is no more licensing them. In addition, on these new models, you're going to find HX3 for much higher quality content and lower latency. And in addition to the Move line, we will also be featuring our Studio Pro, which falls somewhere between a webcam and a digital SLR.
Good stuff. And what makes the Move 4K such a good fit for educational spaces?
There's a number of things from its price point and quality to having auto tracking features where a lot of schools and educational institutions are just trying to figure out how to do a production. Those auto tracking features go a long way to filling in those gaps as they're figuring it out. And then continuing to make higher quality productions as they continue to learn.
Great, thank you very much. Stephen, a question for you. What are the main concerns you had in mind when setting up these kind of workflows, considering that they would be used and operated by people, necessarily educators or students who don't have that much technical ability? How much do you have to adapt your workflow?
Well, I think the biggest thing was trying to figure out the network scheme going in there, because you're going in there blind. You don't know the network scenario. So having an IT department that's really friendly, really willing to work with you in any way, shape, or form, I think is key when doing installations like this. I mean, obviously you can always create your own little network if you have to, but that was kind of the biggest thing going in there. And then is setting up a training regimen where the ideal situation would be, 10th, 11th, 12th graders. As the 10th graders move up to 11th grade, they then train the new 10th graders coming in the following year. And you just kind of get it working like a well-oiled machine. And, explaining that to the teacher, getting her on board, and then, making that actually happen. I spent a lot of time in there the first year, and now they've gotten to the point where they can continually train the up and coming students that are coming in, and it just kind of works itself.
Right. It sounds like basically the kids teaching the teachers how to use the equipment, basically.
Well, they
Roberto,
picked it up pretty quick.
Yeah, I bet they do. My kids do anyway. Roberto, what kind of thing can we do at NDI to make it easier for educational institutions to be able to use NDI?
Well, I think NDI himself is so easy to use, and that's the simple answer. I mean, what we have done with NDI is trying to make it extremely simple for the user. Even basic user without real network knowledge, they can use NDI in some way with mobile phone, with free NDI tools. I mean, this is really the beauty and the reason of the NDI success.
Okay, Roberto, while I've got you there, I've got a question here. How often have you come into HDCP issues with NDI deployments?
Oh, there's a very simple answer. We do not support HDCP with NDI yet.
Right. Okay. Well, that's probably why then. Matthew, how would you like to? Well, we would like to remotely produce content in the healthcare industry, but we don't see a connection for the PTZ camera in the hospital environment for security reasons. How can we get around that? This is a question from one of our viewers.
Yeah, so this is something we've actually tackled a number of times. We have plenty of our cameras in the healthcare industry. And really what needs to happen there, it's less about the camera, it's less about NDI. This is more about you having a discussion with the healthcare system you're trying to get these into. And really you need to meet with their IT department. So one of the things you're going to find, regardless of it being a camera or another object, if it's going into a hospital or any scenario like that, they want to document the product. They want to know what flaws exist, what vulnerabilities exist. And it's not that it can't have these things. They need to document it so they can properly protect the device. So ultimately, you need to have a discussion with the IT team at the hospital or healthcare, team you're trying to work with. And I think you'll find that it is a much better fit than you're currently envisioning.
Great, thank you very much. Roberto, will a 1 gigabit switch be significant with 3 4K PTZ's cameras over a LAN? What would the latency look like?
Well, let's say this depends of the camera or the network. I mean, NDI himself can be really fast, but really depend of the processing capability of the encoder. And then we need to consider if we are talking about NDI high bandwidth or NDI HX. For example, NDI HX3, something that we just defined, I would say 1 year ago. In the product definition, in the protocol definition, we define a very low latency. So every camera that supports HX3 must be compliant with what we define. And in the specific case, they are really fast. For example, HX3 definition, glass-to-glass latency must be less than 100 milliseconds. I would say that NDI high bandwidth is still faster, but not so much. I mean, NDI HX3 is very close to NDI bandwidth in terms of latency.
Great. And when we're talking about that, well, I have you here, Roberto. With the release of Dante Video, what do you see as of the future of NDI? What differentiates NDI from Dante Video?
Well, the future is fantastic. Well, I think the main difference is really the ecosystem and the amount of product and the amount of user use already NDI for video. So I don't know what to say more than this. I think is really the NDI ecosystem, NDI offer is growing so fast. And we have millions of users that are using NDI. I don't feel, and we don't feel Dante video as a threat. I mean, there is a space for all of us in the market. That's fine. I mean, but again, what we are trying to do is to increase and improve the ecosystem and to support our user to be successful using NDI. That's it.
Right. Thank you very much, Roberto. A question for both Matthew and Stephen. What makes PTZOptics equipment and the fact that it is NDI enabled perfect for this specific context, like education?
I guess from my standpoint, the ease of use of just plugging it in using PoE. I mean, when you start getting in and you have it when the teacher wants things mounted in certain spaces, right? Trying to find an outlet that's close to it, having the ability to just plug it into Ethernet, and then you've got the NDI pulled in right away. And it doesn't matter if you're using any other software switchers or anything. It just sees it. Being able to show students and even faculty, like, this is how easy it is. You plug it in, you turn it on, the network sees it, you're good to go. That is huge for a lot of installs.
Great. Matthew, anything to add to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just follow up and say, going a step further, it's the ease of accomplishing this in a way that a younger generation is very comfortable with. I think that's the thing that when I first got a little intro to what NDI was going to be, why I fell in love with it. I'd been playing with security cameras and all sorts of IP video streams prior, and they were awesome, but an absolute nightmare to set up. And you were not walking a novice through any of that. First time I touched NDI, I was like, whoa, look at this. I could walk my parents through how to set up a camera for production here. This is amazing. So that, yeah, just kind of continuing with the same thing Stephen said, it's the ease top to bottom.
Right,
May I add something to this?
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry, Roberto.
At IZE in Barcelona this year is a trade show about Pro AV. I met a guy that is coming from a university in Slovenia. They have 4 campuses with 40,000 students. And this guy told me, we use NDI all over the campus, and we share and we produce all our live content with NDI, and we share with NDI to all the students our live content. And it blew my mind. I mean, sometimes we even don't know what is happening there with NDI. And unless we meet people and they told us we are doing this and that. But this example, I mean, a campus with 40,000 students is huge and is an amazing use case.
Yeah, definitely. Matthew, someone's asking me I thought about using a PTZ NDI camera in a conference room. Is it possible to limit access to this camera to people in that room without setting up a new network?
Yes, definitely. So you could do this without setting up a new network and using VLANs. But if you didn't want to go down that route, you can also do this using NDI Access Manager, the NDI webcam, and an option for groups that you will find in the PTZOptics cameras. So one of the things that you can do is, by default, all NDI products are joined to a group called public. This makes them visible to every other NDI device out there. You do not have to do this by default. You could change it to the room name. You could make some gobbledygook name so that nobody's ever going to guess it. And then you just set up that same thing in Access Manager. And all of a sudden now, the PC with Access Manager in that group set and the camera with that same group set are the only two things that are going to see each other. So the key there is removing public from there.
Great, thank you very much. Another question for you or Stephen. I'd like some info about the PoE joystick controllers available at PTZOptics. Are they compatible with other NDI PTZ cameras like Panasonic, Lumens, or even NewTek?
Yes, they are. One of the things I will note there is we found out early on is just because a camera claims that it's doing everything NDI does not necessarily mean they've implemented NDI control. So we early on found that there were a number of camera manufacturers that had NDI video but did not manage to include NDI control. So that is the only caveat I would say. Yes, if it has NDI control implemented, almost everything on our joysticks will control them. There are still a few bugs we've recently been made aware of with the NDI control, but we are working to iron those out. So yeah, just make sure that NDI control, not just NDI, is on the camera.
Great, thank you very much. Roberto, this is a good question for you. Are there any specs that I can give my IT department to help them understand how NDI works? And what ports would need to be open to allow the cameras on their network to function? My IT department always says no first.
Oh, so in our website, we have a document that, a PDF that disclose all this information about networking, port, etc. Just go on the website and download it.
Great, thank you very much. Stephen, how can companies benefit from NDI technology for video conferencing and meetings?
Going back to the ease of use, honest to God, like I have switched over to NDI completely in my studio and just about every workflow that I do. I don't use SDI anymore. I don't use HDMI. It's all SDI. And having that, in your toolbox, if you will, makes live productions for companies that much easier. If you haven't done so, you really need to do that. It's a game changer. I was a little nervous going, old school, going SDI and then saying, oh man, I got to go to NDI. If you're a company and you're on the fence, man, I'm telling you, this is the way to go. You can implement so much new equipment without the headache of finding adapters and running extra wires. It just works.
That's great. Stephen, I have another question for you here, talking about people sitting on the fence. If my school district IT folks are very wary of network security, etc., can I set up a multi-camera setup using a hotspot or even live view?
Exactly. In fact, that's kind of a setup we did as a suggestion for doing the baseball games this spring, was taking a gigabit switch out, running all the cameras to the gigabit switch, running it to a vMix or OBS machine through Ethernet, and then using the hotspot. Although wireless isn't ideal for streaming, I mean, that's the only option for out there in the middle of a baseball field or soccer field or a football field. That was a suggestion to do that using live view or using a portable hotspot, cell phone portable hotspot, and it's worked really well for them.
Great, that was a great question. Thank you so much. Roberto, a question close to your heart about audio. I know Dante is limited to 48K audio sample rate, where Ravina Network can allow for 96 kilobytes per second audio sample rate. Ravina Network does not support video, however. Does NDI support 96K audio?
So even Dante supports 96, by the way. Today, NDI support 48 kilohertz. But I mean, we are, generally speaking, NDI is codec agnostic. So I don't see any limitation of in the future supporting different, let's say, depth on audio. Today we have 48 kilohertz support just because interoperability, and this is more than enough for video production. I mean, 48 kilohertz is the standard for video production with uncompressed audio.
Great, thank you very much for that, Roberto. Matthew, I have a question for you. Which controller would you recommend to control 3 or 4 or even more PTZOptic cameras? And a big thank you from Las Vegas. You've got some fans there, obviously.
So I'm going to do some steps to that answer.
Okay.
Partially because it kind of depends on your budget and your setup. If you're trying to be a little bit more budget conscious, or you have an existing, serial control setup, our HC Joy is a wonderful option. I've seen kids beat this thing up, and it just keeps on doing its job perfectly. Outside of that, though, what we find a lot of people wind up with is our Super Joy product. Mainly because this allows you to grow into controlling a lot more aspects of your production. If you have vMix in place, you can control that. If you have a TriCaster, you can control that from the device. And beyond that, it allows you all sorts of profile. Really, it allows you to grow with your production. So I highly recommend people, especially for the price point, consider and take a look at the SuperJoy. I do not think you will be disappointed, and it also still supports serial control.
Great, thank you. A question for both you, Matthew and Stephen. We're having autofocus problems with our cameras, with the cameras we're using now. How are your cameras on distinguishing focus with multiple faces on screen at once? People in the diocese with more people behind them, for example, or finding or holding the correct focus. Also, people in the lectern with crowd behind them holding focus. I guess that's an AI autofocus question.
So I would make a recommendation if they're using our cameras. One of the things that they can do, they can set a specific manual focus state with every single preset. So the beauty is, that you recall that person at the dais. It is going to be focused at that person on the dais. It is not going to drift. It is not going to try and change its focus. That being said, I really like to suggest autofocus only when you do not know what's going to be going on in the scene.
Okay, great. Good advice. Thank you so much. Roberto, it's my understanding that NDI is processor intensive. How many 4K NDI feeds can successfully be sent to the software switch?
So this is a good question, and allow me to explain something more deep on NDI. So first of all, we need to consider that we have two different NDI, NDI high bandwidth and NDI HX. NDI high bandwidth is our own proprietary codec and is not really processor intensive. It's very light, by the way. So a modern CPU, for example, my laptop is a Core i7, 2 years old. I can process something like 70 stream by the processor. But then networking is a different story. So the performance of what a software mixer can do with NDI is a combination between CPU and network, if we talk about NDI bandwidth. With NDI HX is a bit different because the codec is different, can be H.264 or HAVC, and this is using more resource. But I would say with modern computer with powerful GPU at this point, I think user can do a lot. Then there is a third aspect, is the software application that is using NDI. I mean, there are different software applications. Some of them, they use the free SDK. Some of them, they use the advanced SDK. And with the advanced SDK, is much easier to use the proxy. So every sender, every camera is able to send two different NDI streams, the full bandwidth, let's say, and the proxy. So, and this is the reason why, for example, with some product like Newton TriCaster, you can have, for example, with TC2 Elite, if I remember well, you can have 38 input. Because only the active input, the input used actively in an output or recorded, are full bandwidth. All the other source are displaying in a multi-view are using the proxy. And so there is a magic combination between a good software tool that is able to use properly NDI and NDI himself that is offering all these features. And so is a complex answer, but again, allows me to explain something more deep in the NDI technology.
Great, thank you for that, Roberto. A question for you, Stephen, and we're beginning to wrap up the questions here. So here's the last question for you, Stephen. To whom should we contact if you're having difficulty setting up PTZOptic cameras with NDI over a Netgear managed switch? And do you have any advice on how to troubleshoot that?
I would suggest contacting the folks over at PTZOptics. We have a great support team, and they'd be able to assist in that. But I mean, for most parts, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Netgear also has a bunch of videos and setup, if I'm not right, Matt, that they show the best way and some of their switches, the best switch for the job for NDI to get it going.
Okay, thank you so much. Matthew, you got anything to add to that?
Not really. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we're almost out of time for today's event, but if we didn't get to answer your question, don't panic. We can try and answer them if you just type them in the chat, and we'll try and get back to you in due course. It just remains to me to thank everyone here today, our guests. Thank you so much for your great answers and for joining us. And all of you watching at home, thank you for joining us. Please remember, if you haven't already, go to ndi.tv for all the latest news and NDI updates. And of course, please download the NDI tools for free if you haven't done it already. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.